Hello, everyone. I'm Michael Quinn. I'm sitting in Montreal, Quebec, and we're going to do a webinar with Jennifer from HackerGal today. A little bit about our program. Peter, myself, and Brenda work for a group called Taking It Global, a nonprofit based in Toronto. And we have federal funds to help the digital skills learning, coding, and robotics of Canadian students and teachers. And our specific program is called Code to Learn. And I'm sure Peter or Brenda will write in the chat where you can go to get resources to learn about coding and robotics. Specifically today, we're going to work with one of our partners. HackerGal has also received federal funds from Industry Canada to teach the same digital skills, etc. But their specific target group is girls in grades 6 to 9, and they do wonderful jobs of improving their skills. So hopefully they will pursue a path at university that involves STEM fields. So without further ado, I'll pass it over to Jennifer, and she's going to introduce how to use some interesting free online tools to do digital animations and photo editing.
Thank you, Michael. Hi, everybody. My name is Jennifer. If you've seen me the last few weeks, I've kind of walked you through some of the coding that you're going to be using when you're creating creative video games on Lynx. Today's lesson is kind of going to shift the focus a little bit, as Michael said, and I'm really going to walk you through some creative ideas that you can use right away and then start integrating into your Lynx projects. I'll start off right now. I'm just going to share my screen and show you where you can access the file that we worked on last week. Perfect. So once you go to the Lynx homepage, all you need to do is click on the All Projects tab. Now, because this was created, I believe, a week and a half ago, you'll have to scroll down a little bit more and press the More button. And once you do, you should see week 2 game development. Click on that. Now, for those of you who just want to watch today, feel free to kind of just watch me go through this screen. If you want, you can open up your own template for this project and save it and then start working on it yourself. It's up to you. Going to press my edit button, and you can see that I've added a page to this project that kind of is going to highlight some of the tools that I like to use when I'm designing my games. One of them being, and the main one that I'm going to use today, is called PixLR. When I was younger, I was trained a lot in graphic design using something called Photoshop, which is by Adobe and Adobe products. PixLR is actually a free tool that you can use that pretty much replicates a lot of the design decisions that you can make that are very similar to Adobe Photoshop. So the names of the tools in this specific cloud-based program will be very familiar to those of you who have worked with Photoshop before, but it's a great free alternative, and you don't need to kind of sign up and create an account. You can do it directly from your web browser. I'm also going to be, yep.
Can I just interrupt for a second? So your resolution is very small, and that's perhaps because you plan to use the other side of the screen. I'm not sure. But maybe if you command period a couple of times, that will increase the resolution of your browser.
Can you tell me if it's doing anything for you? Because I don't see any difference on my end. Let me try one more thing. Okay. Peter, can you confirm if the resolution improved?
Not really. In fact, that's
really.
worse. No. You need to. You can't click that. Don't click that button. I know the one you did. Yeah.
Okay.
So
it's the optimize. I'll take that one off.
Yeah, take the optimize off. But if you were to command period, it didn't increase the size of your.
No, I'm using a Mac, just so you know.
Yeah. Command period should do it. No.
Not command plus sign.
Ah, sorry. Plus sign. Thank you, Sigrid. Yeah, command plus sign.
How about that?
That's better.
What I'll
Thank you.
That help?
Thanks.
Okay.
Thanks, Sigrid.
Thanks, guys, for the save. Perfect. So continuing on from this point, I'll just say that this page is there, and we're going to be working through some of these links today. But the very first thing I should show you really is the sample clip art that exists in Lynx. For those of you who are kind of new to working with images, this is kind of the place that I would recommend you start, because on Lynx, they actually have a bunch of sample clip art in a variety of categories that you'll find useful as you're starting to play with your projects. The first thing to do to find the sample clip art is to press the plus sign. And you'll notice at the very bottom of the drop-down menu, it says sample clip art, so it's very intuitive. And there's a number of options here. The one thing I really want to caution, however, is when you click one of these, it happens to load all of the sample clip art that's available in that category. And when you are adding images and image files into your actual project, what it ends up doing is creating a larger size of the actual file. So for myself, I prefer that when I'm working with clip art that I know exactly kind of the design choices I'm making, and that I delete the ones that I don't want to stay in the clip art pane just by clicking the trash bin. This kind of frees up that space in my project and makes sure that, you know, I don't encounter any bugs that are related to downloading the file size of an image, so that when my users are playing on the other end, it's not going to have any problems displaying those images to them. So just a caution, a word of caution, is to just keep your clip art pane as clean as possible. If you're not using the image, get rid of the image, because you can always upload new ones here and use the number in the set shape command. So when I think of using images a lot of the time and branching outside of the sample clip art pane, the first thing I typically tend to do is go to Google. And I think this is pretty natural habit for most people. When we don't know the answer to a question or we want to know something, we go to a Google search and we kind of just put that word in. So in this case, say in my project, I want to look for a specific graphic of a turtle. When I enter the word turtle, of course, I'm not on the actual image search right now, so I'm going to get, as you can see, lots of results. And that doesn't really help me when I'm trying to find an image. So one of the first things that I really want to teach you how to work with is kind of the image tab on Google, and how to search for those files that are going to be easy to work with and easy to edit, and at times even have a transparent background, which is what I like to work with. So once you click on the image tab here, you can see that I'm getting a lot of images of turtles, but for myself, I really want kind of more of an animated look or a cartoon look. The first thing that I want to focus on is pressing this tools button here. And this is where I'm going to filter down a lot of these settings so that I can really find the images that I want to work with. So one of the things you can note is that you have the option of looking for different sizes. When you're working with background images, for example, a big background photo, you're not going to want a smaller image file. You're going to want to work with something that's much bigger. Whereas if you might have little clickable buttons, you might want to search through the icon method, which will have much smaller images. And keep this in mind because every image has a specific file size attached to it. So the larger the image, of course, the file size tends to be larger as well. The next thing you can focus on is really narrowing it down to the color choice. Here is where you'll find the word transparent. And when you see this, this means that it's going to try and locate images that have transparent backgrounds, or no white background, black background, colorful background. It's really just the image file itself. I like to look for these in particular because they're really good for layering on top of other areas of your project. But the third category is what's most interesting. So when I was a high school teacher teaching my grade 12 students, I often found that they would use images in their projects without actually appropriately citing them or giving credit. And at times they didn't know that the images that they were using weren't actually allowed to be reused in their projects. And so it's important that when you're taking images from the internet that you actually have the right usage rights, that you can actually use these in your project. Otherwise it's a form of plagiarism or stealing, and there could be repercussions depending on, you know, say your game goes global and you're selling copies of it, but you're using images that aren't what you've designed. You can run into some complications there. So what you want to select from the usage rights here is this one here that says labeled for non-commercial reuse with modification. And the word modification is important here because what we're going to be doing with these images, what I'm going to show you what to do, is how you can actually start to edit these images yourself on the PixLR website that we're about to head to. So firstly, I've selected my usage rights here. The next category that I'm really focused on, and the last one for this sake, is the type. And you'll notice that when you click this, generally there's three options, the GIF, the clipart, or a line drawing. I generally tend to select clipart. And this is because usually it provides me with either clipart images or vector images, which generally works really well in Lynx and gives you that very graphic effect, the cartoon or the animated effect that typically you would see in games. So once you've found kind of your selection, it's really about browsing through and, you know, taking a look at the image file and making sure it's what you want to work with. We can start to do really fun things with this image file once we know that it's what we want. So you can see that I kind of clicked in animal cartoon, and the first thing I can do right now is just hover over the image, and you'll see in my lower left-hand corner, I have the dimensions of that image listed, and it's listing it in pixels. So it's saying that for width, it's 960 pixels, I believe, by 541 in height. And this is good to know because now we know actually the size of this turtle from a larger perspective. Now, if I were to take you back to this Lynx project we're working on, last week I showed you that you can actually look up the project size or create different project sizes when you're working with your video games. You can simply click here, press new project, and you'll see that the width and the height is displayed in pixels. So I already know right off the bat that this turtle is going to be quite large compared to my project as it is. And so I can think that I'm going to have to somewhat make this smaller, either within Lynx or within my photo editor. So the other thing that I like to check for just to make sure that the integrity of my photo is there is usually I like to right click and do a little practice of saving my image as. And this is where I really just check the format of the actual file, which you can see is not showing up as a PNG necessarily, which means that it's not necessarily showing me the type of image I want to work with. Either way, we're going to try and convert this and work with it. So right click on this and I'm going to copy the image address. And this image address is really just the URL. And it's important because I'm going to use that URL when I'm editing this photo. So the photo editor, the first tool that we're really going to get into depth with is called PixLR. You can see I've kind of opened it up on this tab. It's really a simple web address that you can get to, and you get to this main page, and it may seem a little bit intimidating because there's lots of buttons you could click and a login. But the great news is you do not need to log in to use this. I choose Advanced PixLRE. And you'll see that it brings me into kind of a home page where I can open up a file. I can see the history from my web browser. That is, if I don't clear the cache on my actual browser, yours will look different, of course. And you'll see that there's this lovely little button here that says Load URL. And typically what you can do is copy and paste the actual photo web address in there. And I can see now actually, and I'm not sure why my computer wasn't showing it, but I can see now that it is a PNG file, which is great. So I'm just going to press load, and automatically I'm entered into my program with this lovely looking turtle to work with. And this is kind of what you're going to see. Perhaps you're not going to have the exact same turtle image as I do, but you're going to come into this editing screen and it might be a little bit intimidating at first, but I'm going to go through some of my favorite tools and kind of walk you through how you can start to use this to edit your own graphics within your video games. So I'm going to draw your attention over to the backgrounds layer over here. You'll see it's labeled background, and it actually has a lock symbol beside it, which means that I'm unable to edit it right now, which is okay for now because I want to keep my original image so I know what it looks like. If I right click on background, I have a number of options I can work with. The main thing that I want to click on is this kind of icon here where it says duplicate the layer. And the reason I'm doing that is so that I can maintain the photo that I was first working with. I can hide it, and I can always have it there in my project to kind of go back to if something goes wrong. It's there, it's saved. And so what I want to do is hide the original layer. And so you can see here when I hover over the check mark, it says visible. So when I unclick it, that layer should not be visible anymore. And it's hard to see, of course, because I made a duplicate copy right here that is visible. So if I were to remove this check mark again, you can see I have a completely transparent background right now. So once we have this lovely turtle, what we're going to want to do is start to edit it. And the thing you want to pay attention to when you're working with any photo editor is that you're working on the right layer. So this layer is called background copy. Of course, when you right click, you can rename that what you wish. For now, I'm just going to call this turtle so that I can at least see the difference. One of the best tools that ever came my way in Photoshop, and it's simply because as someone who likes to play around with how things look in terms of color and to kind of work with the shapes and images, sometimes you have to select things within the actual image. And so this beautiful tool over here is called the wand select, or if you're used to Photoshop, it's called the magic wand. And it's here where you actually can start to select individual things within the turtle. So when I click on the turtle, for example, in the mouth, what you see is that it's selecting that specific area. And once I have kind of this selected, I want to double check that again, it's on my turtle layer. I can start to shift the colors of what I'm seeing. First way I could do that, which is really the easiest way, is to actually use the fill tool. I could click on this fill here and I can change my colors, okay? And perhaps I want this to be a deeper shade of red, who knows? So right now I'm going to click within the selected area and it should change color. And you'll see that I've kind of modified the turtle now just a little bit, and that's great and fine, but we kind of want to take it a little bit further. So the next thing I want to do is actually to highlight a different area of the turtle. I'm going to be working with the hump of the turtle to try and add a gradient layer. And gradient is cool because you can start to play with multiple colors and add kind of a shift in the way that it looks. It won't stay fixed as one color per se. So the gradient tool actually comes over here. You'll see it kind of looks like a gradient. And when you select it, what you have the option of is you can play between the settings up here, but the most important one for me is always playing with the different color schemes I want to use. And so I simply click on the bucket here and I can actually select the colors that I want to work with. If you know the hex code, you can always type it in. So if you're working with very specific colors for your game, or you've developed a color scheme that you want to work with, then this is a simple way to kind of remember. You can just type those in. Perhaps you want maybe like, you know, a flow of different colors. So I'm going to kind of pick a teal color here. And then maybe, you know what, I'll change it up to purple so you can see the shade a little bit nicer. Going to play with the second color here and modify it so that perhaps it's a nice purple shade. You can see it's a nice kind of gradient setup for us. And the next thing I want to do is I'm going to change the setting to radial in the shape of a circle, if you can imagine. And I am going to select a line and just highlight it across the selected area. And so what you can see has happened, of course, is that the area that was selected was filled in with the gradient color as opposed to simply the red color that I had chosen for the turtle's mouth. And so here is where you get really kind of more creative kind of with the decisions that you're making in your game. So for example, I might want to change all of the turtle to not really necessarily be green. And you can see that I selected it quite quickly, and I probably went through that way too quick to understand what I did, so I'll repeat it. So firstly, I selected one area, and then there's this magical tool in the, of course, wand tool that allows you to add to your selection. This second button here where it says shift, if you select that and then continue to select other areas in your turtle, it will add it to what you've already selected so that you're not worrying about holding down buttons at the same time. And so right now I've selected kind of all of the green areas that I want to work with. I'm going to go back to my gradient tool. You can see it kind of disappeared from here, which means I don't really have it anymore. And I can play with this again and kind of select the colors or select what I think is close to it. Kind of see how this shifts the way my turtle looks. stretch it across the area, and you can see that it's not quite the same as the other one, but it kind of shifts my turtle. I now have a very funky looking turtle, maybe off to a disco party, I don't know, ready there for me to kind of work with. Now, when you like the image as is, of course, you can save it. It's very simple. You can just save up here. And you're given the option of resaving it as a PNG, which is one of the file types other than JPEG that Lynx actually takes into the platform. And again, it'll show you the image width and height, and you can see the size of that one image as well, which is great. You may want to modify it more, and perhaps you want to change the eye shape to be a bit bigger. So another tool you might want to use is something called the shape tool. So here I select the shape, and perhaps I want my turtle to have star eyes. So I select the actual star here, and you'll see that there's a number of options that are selected. Firstly, there's a stroke value, which is basically an outline like you see on this turtle, and there's a fill. And they're taking these colors from your actual color palette over here. So you actually have to change these if you want it to have a different effect on your own screen. So firstly, I might turn my stroke off because I want it to just be one color with no outline. And what I'm going to do is I can test that. I'm going to hold my mouse down and draw this shape. You can see it's probably not in the right area, of course, but it's filling in the way that I want. Now, say I put it in a place that I'm not too happy with. It's very easy to just go backwards. You can undo, or if you're used to working on your keyboard, you can do Control-Z. Another thing that you may want to do is when you start to add other elements to your turtle, you might want to add another layer so that you don't compromise what you've already worked on in the first layer. When you add another layer to your project, you're going to get many options. I generally just pick empty because I like to work with a very clean kind of layer. And the next thing I want to do is try and draw this star as close to over the eye as possible. Now, if it's not quite there, perhaps what we do is we take this lovely arrange, and this will allow us to shift it into place. It also allows us to change the size of it. But once you start to change the size, you'll notice that sometimes the integrity of the shape will actually change. It might become more pixelated, and that's just because it's not staying the initial size that you set the star up. So we'll put the star there. And you'll see it now has a very cool star looking eyeball. But the other thing I might want to do is return to my turtle layer and get rid of the circle that's behind it. Perhaps it's adding some extra background that I can't see right now on my screen, but if I were to zoom up on it, it might be as visible. So if you want to, say, erase elements from an image that already is created, there are really cool ways to do that. The first being, of course, is that you can use the select tool, the magic wand, to select what you want to remove. But you'll notice that I don't necessarily have this color here to fill it in. So one of the things that I might do is click on my color palette and actually hover over the color that is in the turtle. And when I do that, it should actually find the color for me in my project, which saves me a lot of time looking for it. If I press OK now, we can see that it's updated to the color panel on the left. And now I want to try filling in this circle. So first things first, you can kind of see that there's this weird looking outline around the eyeball. And that shows me that when I selected the actual circle shape, it wasn't a pure selection, that there is some outliers to that actual image that still show up here. And so what you could do instead of using the background features, you could also use the freehand draw tool, and it will take, again, this color here. So what I will do is just kind of hover over and erase that line so that it disappears kind of from my project. Now, one thing to keep in mind when you're working with gradients, gradients uses kind of the range of colors, that spectrum. So sometimes you won't be able to pinpoint the exact color, or it will shift in another location on your actual image. So if you're working with one solid color, it's a lot easier to do this. But as you work with gradients, it might be easier to, work on getting the shapes established first before doing any of the filling features. So when I come back to layer 3 and actually select and turn it on right now, you can see it's kind of updated here. It's a lovely little star. And I think my turtle is kind of, you know, ready to go. So I'm going to save it as a PNG now. And I'm just going to rename it something that's a little easier, new turtle. And it should download. You can see that it's downloaded to my download folder, which is perfect. So I'm going to now just show you by returning back to the game development template how this turtle might look in my project. So the first thing I want to do is actually upload it to my clipart pane, which if you're not on right now, you would click the house icon and then just select an empty box and press the plus sign. And if I were to use a URL from a website, I could enter that here, or alternatively, I could select something from my downloads folder, right? Which is what I'm going to do since I just downloaded it. As we go down, I should see it's called New Turtle because I renamed it something. There we go. And I can tell already it has a transparent background just simply because there's no color showing up behind my turtle. So once I've opened it, I press create and you can see the image has populated in number 2. So let's see how this actually looks when it's brought into Lynx on my work area. So first things first, I have a new turtle here. I'm just going to call this new turtle to line. Oh, I might have one of those already. New turtle 1, it is. So next thing I'm going to do is write a set shape command. So just to repeat that for you, it's set shape space, and then I'm using the number 2 because that's where my turtle is. And as I promised you guys, this image was already quite big coming into the program, and it is, of course, too big for my video game. So the next thing I want to do is, of course, the set size feature. And here's where you kind of play with it to see how small you want to get it to go. One thing that you'll see is that when you bring bigger images in, sometimes when you're trying to go down smaller of a size, it might become a little pixelated on the edges. So this is why it's probably important to work with photos that are a little bit more appropriate in size or have the right size dimensions that you're looking for. Of course, you can edit it back in the photo editor and bring it down in size, which won't compromise the quality so much. But you will see it get a little bit pixelated or distorted as it gets smaller, like it is in this one in particular. Okay, so right now, kind of you can see, oops, that I did not type this command correctly, obviously, that this lovely turtle has been imported in. The other kind of cool coding things that I should teach you now while you're working with images, and I apologize for deleting that, I just needed to see a clear space, is working with the primitives in front and in back. And this is where you're going to find most use, I would say, because you're going to start to layer images within your projects, and sometimes the layer that you choose needs to be at the very back of your project so that it's not covering any of the things that you have on your screen. We have this new turtle here, but perhaps I want to have a background image that I use as well. Well, first things first, I need to actually add a new turtle to my screen. And with this turtle here, I need to set it to the shape of a background. So for today, we'll make this, you know, a nice little tree setting. I'm going to pick shape number 9. I'm going to keep writing my set shape command, press enter, and you'll see that my background has appeared. It's covering pretty much everything, but when I actually drag it, I see my turtle is somewhere behind there. So now I'm going to shrink that background. Okay, set size to, let's say 10, a little bit too small. So my goal is to try and fit it within this box that I drew a little bit earlier. Okay, perfect. So this is almost a perfect fit if I had to guess. And for those of you who want to know the actual size from width, this was 400 pixels that I drew across with the turtle. So now that I have this here, if I drag this turtle, it actually goes behind the image, which is not what I want, right? So instead, what I need to do is, you know, use an in front command. So why I did that is because I'm just copying the name of the turtle so that I can speak to it specifically. So I did a command V there, and I wrote the turtle's name, and now I'm going to write a comma, and I'm going to say the command in front. I'm going to type the command, not say it. And you'll see that it's gone green here. And just to give you kind of a background, it's going to bring that current turtle to the front for me. So now that I've pressed enter, what should happen when I drag this turtle is that it should actually appear on the background. Now, again, if you were playing with the background image instead and you wanted the background image to kind of move up, you could, again, use T1 and use the same command, and you'll see the background has now come up. Alternatively, you can write in back. And you'll see that, again, it's moved the background image to behind the turtle. So the three commands here that are super useful, again, are set shape, set size, and then in back and in front. And these are kind of my go-to primitives that I use when I'm starting to layer those images into my project. So now that we kind of have gone through PixLR, is there anything you guys want to know about PixLR before I move on to some of the other websites that might be helpful for you guys? I don't know if Michael or Peter want to jump in with anything going on in the chat.
No, it's very quiet in the chat, so obviously everyone's following.
Okay. All right, I'll show you guys some more tools then. So sometimes actually using images and editing them yourselves is not everybody's cup of tea. There are websites out there that do provide free clipart images that are already kind of there for you to work with. Google is one way to find them, but there's a few others that I've kind of listed here. Clipart Max is one that I found a little bit ago that allowed me to download the free images. And again, I'm always looking for free to use, just so that I'm not in any trouble with the images that I'm selecting. And you'll see that it's really just a search engine. So part of this is to keep in mind that when you're thinking about the design of your game, you want to start to make these decisions before you start to look for the actual images themselves. It will make your search a lot easier, especially when there are so many images out there that you could select. I may decide that I want a different turtle. Maybe I didn't want to use the one that I edited. And you can start to see that just typing the word turtle gives me at least 1,500 clipart results that I can work with. And again, you would just download these as such and you can use them within your own projects, primarily because they are PNG files and they will have that transparent background. So I know sometimes people bring images in and it'll have the white background, and that kind of annoys me sometimes because it doesn't always look as aesthetically pleasing. So this is one option. Another thing that you could do in PixLR that I did not show you necessarily was create your own button. And turtles can act as buttons in Lynx. I think it's really important to know that, which means that if you design a costume for your turtle, you should be able to actually activate that turtle so that it's clickable. And so one thing you could do here is that you could just press the Create New button, and you can decide that maybe you want to make a rectangular button. And I'm just going to keep the dimensions a little bit smaller for this one. I'm going to do 100 pixels by 50. And I'm going to call this my jump button. So I will create it. You can see it's a little tiny here, but I'll zoom in. And I'm going to have the exact same tools to work with, but this time I'm focused on making something that looks kind of like a button, of course. And so I might just fill in any sort of color. I might layer some text on here. Add a new layer. Text. There we go. You can see my text is far too large. And you start to play with these settings up here. The other thing that should be noted is that the color of my text is currently the color of my background, which is why it's not appearing. So I want to change that, which didn't quite work because I didn't highlight my text. So let's just do this, select white. You can see I have some that's appearing here. I'm kind of swiveling my text back and forth, which is not what I wanted to do. Note that you can use your keyboard as well when you want to arrange the text box on your actual button. I'm just using the up and down arrows to navigate it a little bit quicker. Here they give you different fonts to work with, which is great because you may be a little bit more creative with the actual font type that you want to see on your buttons. So maybe I want to do something like that. And then right now this is really not visible. So I'm going to make this text just a little bit bigger. Oh, maybe too big. Okay. Now it looks a little pixelated up close, and it's likely because this image file is quite small in hindsight. It's not exactly the nicest looking text in my opinion. Could be my fault for choosing the wrong font type. I'm just going to go back to my text layer, look at the settings and see if there's anything going on here that I don't particularly like. So one thing I could do is add an outline around my text. So again, that's the kind of the black line that appears, and usually you can change the color of that depending on what you want. You can start to see that when I play with this, the actual text itself starts changing. So one thing to keep in mind is always to kind of look through these settings, make sure it is what you actually want. The stroke can be bigger, of course, so that it looks a little bit more defined there. This is gray, so not exactly the nicest highlighter. I'm just going to choose black, which kind of shows up a little bit nicer. You can also type the number if it's a little bit easier for you than to use the slider. And maybe you want to add shadow to your text. It's up to you. For now, I'm going to leave that out. The other thing I want to see is maybe my letter spacing. When I start to do this, you'll see that the actual characters there will space out for us, so it looks a little bit more spacious here. And maybe I want to bold my text a bit. So not the nicest looking font type, but we're going to work with it. So now if I want to save this as a button, or save this as an image, I should say, just again, go through the same process of saving it. You can save it as a JPEG or a PNG. I usually pick PNG. It's not a transparent background, so it's not going to make a difference here because it is an actual rectangular shape. So now that I've downloaded my jump button, I'm going to go back to my Lynx and import that in. And you'll see that if I actually change the screen, I'm going to replace this jump button here with my new jump button. So working with our clipart pane, start to select, of course, the download. A little bit of a delay on my end. There we go. Okay, we can see my jump button, or my jump image has actually gone here. It's not a button yet, I should say. So I want to add a new turtle. I drag it to where the jump button is. And then I'm going to make sure I know its name. T2, comma. Let's use our set shape command again. Okay. You can see my jump button has appeared here. And what I want to do is actually make it so that it does the exact same procedure I've already set up. So if you remember, that's called jump. I can simply right click on my jump and say on click, jump. And to freeze this button so that people can't drag it on the screen. And now if I press this button, it should cause this pink turtle to jump. So as a very simple way and a very simple button that you can start to see that simply by just, creating a rectangular box and then adding the text to it, I've created my own style of button within the game. Now, from a cohesive point of view or balance, when I look at this, I mean, it's not complete very clearly. I have multiple colors on my screen, and I'm kind of just experimenting with what I can and cannot do, or what I want to do here. So remember that the creativity kind of lies in your corner, and you get to do what you think is right, but you're making design choices for the game that you're actually creating. So I'll save that project there so you can see it. And then I'll show you the last few tools in these short few minutes that I have. So the first thing that we'll do is I'll show you another website that allows you to generate your own buttons if, again, you don't want to use an editor. This one is Button Optimizer. Once it loads, you'll see it's a free button editor that downloads in PNG format again, so you can bring it directly into Lynx. You start to see that the settings here look very familiar to kind of the photo editor. You're working with the colors and the hex code of that color. Again, you're looking at the text that you're going to use on the button. So perhaps we'll stick with the jumping theme. And they're a little bit more limited in terms of the text choice that you have, but they do have some good ones that you can, I'm sure, find use for. And you start to play with kind of here, you'll see that there's a red shadow around the actual button. I'm not a huge fan of those shadows, so I usually eliminate them. I remove the text shadow. You can start to see that I like to kind of, like, you can play with the different colors of the actual scheme. There's a little bit of a gradient kind of going on and a hovering option here that won't show up so much on Lynx, but at least we'll see here. You can remove this icon, so this arrow that you see, remove that. You could always look for a different one. I don't know if they'll have any icons to do with jumping, but maybe. Perhaps you want this arrow. Not exactly the most appealing one. Maybe that's a smiley face. So you can start to kind of add your own cool little features to it. And then when you're ready to download this actual button, you just download it as a PNG image and you'll see that it should appear here as a download. And just as I did the last time, I can actually bring that back into Lynx, and there I have a new button that I can work with. So that's another way to do kind of cool customization. One of the last websites that I'm going to show you that is a favorite for me is something called Unsplash. And Unsplash really focuses more on the background images. So for those of you who can see my video right now, you can probably see that Mario is right behind me with his hand out. And I found this image through Unsplash. So you can see here, they're freely usable. A lot of the people who actually post to this website are photographers or digital creators, and they're not asking for anything in return except for maybe shout outs for their work if you use it in your project. So this is one of those websites that if you do end up using images from them, it's always nice to kind of source them at the end or give them a thank you. Don't have to pay them anything to use it, of course, but you'll see that there's kind of a wide variety to work with. One of the coolest areas that you might like is even the wallpapers or the textures and patterns. These are going to give you really, really large kind of desktop size photos, and I'm using an iMac right now, so my desktop screen is quite large. So I'm always looking for higher resolution photos when I want to use that. But even in my projects as a background image, you might want to have something that looks a little less animated. Perhaps you want it to look, you know, more like a jungle theme here. Or greenery, whatever the case is that you're picking in your project. This is kind of those background images that you might find to be useful. Sometimes you can find images with quotes on them that might look good in your projects. You can kind of use the search engine to kind of find what it is you're looking for. And I'm just going to stick with my turtle theme because it's been an easy search to go through. And you'll start to see kind of the image files here. Again, you can kind of browse through it and look at what you want. It's one of those things where it's a rabbit hole. You could get lost searching for all of these images. And again, this is why I kind of point back to the creative features always come towards the end of your game once your coding has been put out there, it's designed and it's efficient, because then that's when you start to layer on all these kind of additional elements with the imagery and it really starts to come together. So with all that in mind, I would say the first few things that I would keep in mind as you start to take this information and build your own games is to think about a color scheme. Think about perhaps 3 colors that you want to have play as the dominant colors in your game. Think about what your characters are going to look like, and if it makes sense, if, you know, the turtle is the main character, and if that turtle jumping up for this flower is kind of the design decision that you think is best for the users of your game. And then as you start to think about those color schemes and what your characters will look like, you'll think about, you know, well, where is this game taking place? And this is where you start to think really that games are another form of storytelling, right? There's some sort of strong narrative there that is guiding the characters in the game. And good games generally tend to have, you know, multiple levels, or they're tiered to the point where people enjoy playing it and they enjoy the characters, or they're referencing the characters. And so I always find that when you're making these choices, remember who your user is, who you're actually creating the game for. If it's for yourself, if you're, you know, just having fun and trying out the features, then, you know, go nuts with it. Play with different things and see what works, because that's how it is. It's trial and error. And so when you're looking at your own video games and how it might kind of advance in the future, these are just one of many different tools that you can kind of go out there to get a little bit more creative in your games. And so with that, I'll kind of end my presentation and leave it open if anybody has questions or wants to see how, you know, that Lightroom editor, the Pixel LR tool works a little bit more. I can go in there for the last few minutes and kind of, you know, follow directions if you'd like.
Well, Jennifer, that was great. I was totally absorbed from the minute you started till right now. And in fact, I will steal the microphone, and I have a question. If you thought back to your turtle, which you started with, is it incredibly difficult to have a second frame animation of that with the legs in a different position? So,
No, it's not terribly difficult. I mean, the best way I could like explain this here is that when you're thinking of animating the actual object, what you want to do is remember where your turtle is going to be positioned, and you're probably going to want to modify, you know, the shifting how the actual image looks, so that when it actually goes between the set shape command, you can actually have it go between multiple shapes, running that animation with the forever movement that we kind of established. Is that what you're referring to, Michael?
yeah, but specifically the drawing part of it using PixLR. If you just like change the position of the legs, for example.
So when it comes to the actual editing of the legs, the one thing that I would comment is that what I like to do, because I'm creating multiple layers, I always have the original layer, that's the first one. And so that if I screw up in any way or delete something I didn't want to delete, my original turtle is there. But what you can start to do is start to take out pieces, it sounds really terrible when I say it this way, but take out pieces of that turtle and kind of rotate them. So you're editing the individual pieces on the actual body of the turtle. Other ways you could do it is actually to transform the whole shape so that you're adjusting it in terms of the positioning of the shape, which doesn't always give the desired effect that people think when they're looking at animations and say arms moving this way and this way. You have to think of every image in that set shape command where it's rotating between it, it's another movement. And when you put that all together and it's moving very quickly, it's like one of those flip books. So you're going to see it go really, really fast. And is it going to have the desired effect you want? And so I think for that, once you start to edit and you get used to kind of that magic wand tool, it becomes a lot easier to highlight specific parts and then copy them to new layers and start working with it as though they are different parts and moving in different ways.
Okay, got it. Thanks.